Hello Internet, welcome back to our Apartment Rat series. We're continuing with the voiceover work, but we're going to try something a little bit different today. Still trying to figure things out, trying to find out what the best approach for the voiceovers are. So we're just going to jump into the gameplay. With the new health changes, we regenerate health much more slowly overnight now. So I thought we would focus a little bit more on ranged combat. So we spent a little time looking through our guns and ammunition. Unfortunately, we don't have very much of the double-aught shot for our shotgun, so I thought we'd check out some of the other stuff we have. Tried to use the Uzi was one of my priorities, or the Storm, both of which are 9mm. Unfortunately, I did not have clips for either of these guns, and the game doesn't actually let you reload them one round at a time directly into the chamber. So instead, we took our trusty Remington and we loaded it with birdshot because we had a fair bit of birdshot, and we prepared for battle. Unfortunately, looking through all that ammunition really drained the energy from me, so I decided to take a break and get some sleep. Thankfully, despite the deep and crushing loneliness that I felt, I had my shotgun to keep me company. I'll spare you all the details, but when I woke up, there was that post-coital awkwardness, and I was full of regret, and the gun would not look me in the eyes. Also, because I'm an idiot, I decided to head out without eating or drinking anything, despite being very thirsty. I did manage to grab my wheelbarrow on the way out, so that's something. The goal of the outing was to locate really any vehicles that had solar panels and storage batteries. We're going to need those things for setting up our recharging station, and we're going to want them in our Deathmobile down the road anyway. Unfortunately, you can't do vehicle work in the dark, so we just wanted to go out and kind of spot those vehicles, hoping that, a couple different ways we could have played things out. If we found a good vehicle, we could, maybe push it back to base with another vehicle. We could find it in an isolated location where we could come out safely during the daytime and harvest materials from it, or we would clear the local area of zombies and come back in the daylight to work uninterrupted, which is the hardest thing to do of those options. We stumbled across a fire engine, which is pretty cool, the second one that we found in the playthrough, and it contained a lot of firefighter gear. I did sift through them, but unfortunately none of the gear fit me. I kind of think that they always spawn the incorrect size. I don't think they ever fit on spawn, or else I've just never seen them that way. And it wasn't really what I was looking for in this particular excursion, so I left all that gear behind. I did mark it on my map, and we will probably return in the future when we need Nomex or Kevlar. I think they have Kevlar. But certainly for Nomex, once we get to the point where we're repairing our gear, we're going to want to have access to Nomex patches. And the truck itself is valuable as well. It's a source of, I think they're heavy frames, but regardless, it's a source of frames, tanks, and of course they have floodlights, which are pretty valuable. I personally really like the floodlights in the game. We continued north down a side road, and we stumbled across yet another fire truck. That's the third one that we found in this particular series, so I think we're pretty set on fire trucks for the moment. While I was wandering around, I spotted something in the distance that I had never seen before. It was an incandescent husk, but I read it as incandescent Hulk, and was briefly terrified. This once human is visible only as a glowing white silhouette that you have to squint to see, cloaked in a crackling field of lightning that pulses like a beating heart. It walked slowly and deliberately, the thunderstorm surrounding it, eagerly jumping to anything conductive within its grasp. Now, as far as I know, I've never seen one of these before, and based on that description, I wasn't really interested in squaring off with it, so I ran away. All the cool kids are cowards, so I figured that would be fine. We did eventually find a vehicle with some solar gear, and it was mostly in pretty good condition. However, it wasn't in a great spot, considering we'd have to fully clear the area around it in order to harvest those materials. But it was the most intact bunch of panels that I had seen up until that point, so we marked it on the map. Really not thrilled about where it was located. I did think that maybe because I'd been working out so much lately that I could just like Hulk out and drag the car back to base. But alas, I was weak, so we moved on. I saw a home improvement store and figured I'd pop my head in, didn't really know what materials would be there. I tried not to look at the female mannequins as I traveled through, I had the shotgun with me, and I knew that she was a jealous little hussy, and I really didn't want to deal with that because the apocalypse is hard enough. First home invasion of the day went pretty well. The occupants were not thrilled to see me, but they don't get very much say in the matter, so I did it anyway. Their kitchen was empty, and the murder had been for nothing. Very disappointing. I planned to do the same thing to their neighbors, but they seemed to be having a party, so I bailed because I am a coward, as discussed previously. Things got a little rough after that. Navigating the town was a little bit tricky, and some of the enemies started tracking me. Not really sure how they started tracking me. It wasn't particularly bright, and I know people always say, hey, your scent, whatever, but I wasn't there very long, and I don't think it was my scent. Scent tends to accumulate over time and isn't really an issue if you've only been there for a few turns, unless the turn times mess that up as well. It is possible that the wheelbarrow's wheels were making noise as they triggered over the ground, but I'm not 100% on that. All I know is that a few zombies followed me into this building, including a shocker, a feral hunter, and a survivor zombie, all of which I didn't really want to deal with, so I was making my way to the back door. And even once outside, they followed me, started getting a little nervous, and I couldn't really lift my wheelbarrow over the fence, so I thought I'd make a stand with my shotgun. It did not go super well. If you'll remember, I had loaded the gun with birdshot. Turns out that ammo is pretty much trash, or maybe I just had a real bad experience with it, but it quickly became obvious that it wasn't going to work for me. So I hopped the fence, and I bailed for the billionth time in this episode. Of course, in a time of need, I always failed to climb on the first attempt, but whatever. After getting chased around the block, I headed back to retrieve my precious wheelbarrow, and we made our way away. I wasn't really very well equipped. I was a bit shaken by the encounters. I get a little timid when I get surrounded. I freak out a little bit. So I decided just to head back to base. The outing wasn't a total bust because I did find the fire trucks, which have valuable gear, and I found a place where we could harvest some solar panels, but it was still a pretty disappointing outing. Back at base, my fury overwhelmed me, and I chose to unload our shotgun. I considered setting the birdshot on fire, but the risk of arsonizing our base was a little too high, so I didn't want to do that. I mean, that's not true. I very much wanted to do that, but I chose not to do that. Once again, I was frustrated by our lack of magazines, so I thought I would check out the crafting menu. It seemed like maybe we would be able to make mags from scratch. We couldn't, though, but I totally understand why. Clips would be a little difficult to manufacture, like for a survivor in the apocalypse. It's fine, it's not a big deal that you wouldn't be able to make a manufactured magazine for a manufactured firearm. Our focus was extremely low, and I was struggling to figure out what I should be doing to keep myself busy, so I decided to eat and drink after a long day of basically doing nothing. Still wanted to deal with that firearm issue, so I took a look at some of the guns that are available in the crafting menu. These had the added bonus of being at our current mechanics skill level, so that if we crafted these pipe rifles, we would actually level up our mechanics. And they do have a relatively low material requirement, just pipes and some other miscellaneous crap that we could pretty easily get. The problem is that they take a really long time to craft. But it seemed like something to work towards. I was lacking direction for the most part. So we grabbed our home wrecker and we went out looking for something we could smash to pieces for pipes. Apparently lamps only sometimes give pipes. I don't know, maybe because we're smashing instead of disassembling. But the vent things on the balcony always seem to drop them. So it wasn't really hard to find them. It just took me a minute to realize you could smash those machinery things. And since we also have a forge, I checked out if we could just craft pipes from scratch, maybe in batches of large numbers. You can, but the time requirement doesn't really make it worth it. Pipes are pretty plentiful. We can just go out into the world and find them a lot easier than crafting them. After gathering materials, I realized that I'd been recording for longer than I normally would have, and decided to just call the episode without actually crafting anything at all. Seemed like a good idea at the time, but since I'm doing a different type of commentary, I'm actually only like 10 minutes in, so we'll have to maybe merge another episode into this commentary, which I will do, which for you will be right now, but for me is probably going to be a little later today. Really hate splitting things up like that, but that's what I've got to do. So, alright, jumping ahead to the next episode. Hopefully the volume of this voiceover and the previous voiceover match up. I often have trouble with that. I'll try to match them up. But we're just going to jump into the next one. I realized in between what we were doing that we did in fact have magazines for those other guns. When we found them originally, I had foolishly removed them and placed them on the unsorted pile, and I kind of thought they would auto-sort into the ammunition square. That's usually where I keep magazines. Unfortunately, magazines require their own zone, so I set that up and we sorted everything out. I had also spotted a corpse in one of my piles in a couple episodes ago, so I grabbed that and hauled it away. My goal initially was to hurl it out the window, but it turns out that I'm a big baby and it was too heavy. So instead, I just dumped it at that ledge outside. After the awkward liaison in the last episode, I decided to take a break from my shotgun. The only other skill we really have any levels in is rifles. So I chose the Storm. It's a 9mm. We have a pretty healthy supply of 9mm ammo. We also have 2 clips for it, so I set myself up with plenty of backup ammunition for emergencies. I'm particularly fond of extended magazines in guns because I think they make them look cool, if I'm being honest. It doesn't mean much in a game like Cataclysm because you can't really tell, but that doesn't matter, you know. So we do go with the extended mag primarily. The goal for this episode was to get the flatbed truck up and running. Now, that's the big truck with all the cargo spaces that we had seen in the last episode up by the shooting range. Problem was that the truck had broken controls. At first, I checked to see if we could craft them, and we could, but I wasn't sure which of those controls were needed. I think it was vehicle controls versus electronic control something. But so I had to go outside and check the name of the controls item. I thought since that vehicle had controls that we could just smash that tile and it would give us all the materials we needed for crafting the controls. I was wrong, and it was a waste of time. Well, it was mostly a waste of time. I did see some springs, which reminded me of really thick slinkies, so I chose to take them home with me. If I throw some googly eyes on them, I think it might help alleviate with the soul-crushing loneliness that I was talking about. And it was at this point that my attention span started to get the better of me. I abandoned my search for controls and decided to look through my books. I don't know why. And then books are boring, so I ended up looking into craft raising my mechanic skill. I made about 2 pipe rifles before I realized how pointless that was and went back to the books. I read everything just to get access to any crafting recipes they might have, thinking there might be better options for craft training mechanics. Unfortunately, there weren't. It's really just the pipe rifles. I wasted the rest of the night eating, drinking, and smoking a little weed. When the sun came up, I decided to head out and see if I could just pull the controls out of another vehicle. I could, so I did. I also took the time to make some lockpicks because I was heading back up towards that gun range, and I figured that I could crack the safe up there. Before that, though, I spent a little time gathering up all the casings at the range. We probably wouldn't be using them anytime soon, but they have some value in the late game, and I figured since we're there and they're in a pretty concentrated numbers, we might as well grab them. There were a lot more than I expected there to be. It also reminded me of a time that I had gone shooting with a friend, and we definitely picked up all of our casings, or we tried to. Is that weird? Like, do people just leave them wherever? I haven't actually been to a range very often, not like a proper range, so I really don't know what the etiquette is. And I was quite young when I went there before. But anyway, although it did take a few tries, we managed to crack the gun safe. We were rewarded with an RM-103A Auto Magnum. It's a handgun that fires the caseless rounds. I think it's one of, if not the most powerful handgun in the game. I don't think we have any other rounds for it, but it did come with one in the clip, and it had a magazine. So I mean, that's something. I hadn't even expected to actually crack the safe. I thought we would just jam the lock or whatever. So it was a pretty good. It worked out. Returning our attention to the flatbed, I removed the broken controls and then attempted to replace them. I was at this point that I realized I had left my welder at home and had to make a trip back to get it. There was a dragonfly out in the swamp, but I ignored it and it left me alone. On the return trip, I used the new auto move function. You can check out my most recent experimental cataclysm video on the channel for a basic rundown of what it is and how to use it. I didn't think I'd really be using it much, but in this example where we're just walking from one end to the other, it's pretty handy. I managed to install the vehicle controls and thought we were done, and that we had a running vehicle. I was wrong. I was very wrong. After spending entirely too long trying to start the truck, I realized that the faulty engine was never going to fire up. I thought if we tried it enough it would just start, but no. So for the first time in probably the history of my gaming and Cataclysm, I decided to mend the engine. Normally I would just throw an entirely new engine in it, but it was a big truck and I figured that the engine it spawned with was probably like the best engine for it. Because it was such a large vehicle, I didn't want to risk putting something in it that would not work. There were 3 things that needed mended, which I think is a lot. Usually it's just 1 or 2 broken things. But again, I was kind of running out of time, so I just bailed into the next episode. Now we're going to jump into that video as well, and I'm really hoping that all 3 of these put together will combine into one regular length episode. It'll probably be a little long, but that's what we're going to do. So in the next video, the basic rundown of the requirements for mending the engine is that we needed a filter, which we can craft. We needed a small electric motor, and we needed a mechanic skill of 4 to install a mechanical pump. Now we had actually found a pump at the Public Works building. I think it's the same pump, and we just needed our base mechanic skill to be upped a little bit for that one. While heading back to the base, the dragonfly interrupted my auto move, which filled me with a rage that I have never known before. But I ignored the thing because, you know, live and let live. Our search for the motor was a bit interesting. We found a large one in a previous episode, which we left outside. Unfortunately, we needed a small one. It occurred to me that fridges could now be deconstructed for them, so I did that. Unfortunately, that actually gave me a tiny electric motor, not a small one. The dragonfly started getting on my nerves around that time, so I decided to bludgeon it to death. However, after a bit of dancing, it just ran away like a little bitch. After that, I went back to look for a motor. The street sweeper behind the apartment building actually contained a regular-sized motor, so we basically found every type of electric motor except for the one that we actually needed. I did remember, though, that there was an electric scooter nearby, and in fact it did have the motor that we were looking for, so we got that sorted out. Now that we had taken care of that one particular mend, we decided to head upstairs and make ourselves the makeshift automotive filter, which we need. It required paper, a can, and some tape. So we butchered a few of our duplicate books to secure some paper, and we crafted the filter, nice and easy. With those 2 items secured, I headed back out to the truck. I thought that mending 2/3 of the problems would at least let it run, so that we could maybe pull it back to base to work on. But no, it refused to start, even temporarily, it refuses to start. And again, I kind of want to complain about the messages in Cataclysm. It'll say things like, the engine bangs as it starts, but it doesn't actually start. So, you know, those things, maybe it's just because I was frustrated, but it was definitely getting on my nerves. And at that point, I was pretty angry, and when the dragonfly reappeared, I just didn't want to deal with it, so I shot it in the face, and then harvested its body for meat, because I'm a human being, and that's what we do. And realizing that our only option for repairing the engine was to raise our mechanic skill, I headed back to base and set up to start craft training. Again, the only things that were really available to us were those pipe rifles, so I began crafting them. And this took a pretty kind of a long time. I think each pipe rifle takes about 15 minutes on the low end. Some of them take like 20 minutes. And we were making them in pairs, so we passed quite a lot of time this way. Partway through, we stopped to cook some pelmeni. I just thought, why not? You know, we have the meat. Unfortunately, they take about 40 minutes to cook pelmeni, but they do extend the spoilage timer on the meat for up to 2 days, I think. So throughout the day, we cooked and ate most of the meat from the dragonfly, and I think we dehydrated a little bit of it, and we also made some pelmeni for the following day, because again, it extends that time. With that squared away, we continued grinding our mechanic skill until we leveled up. And then after all that work, we decided to take a nap. And that about wraps up this particular episode. I gotta be honest, I didn't love doing this. The sheer amount of editing that's going to be required to put this together is pretty staggering. I'm going to be cutting down about 60 minutes of footage into what I imagine will be about 28 minutes of video. The sheer number of cuts is going to be very hard on my video editing software. It's really designed for low-end computers and small video files. So don't expect me to do this a lot in the future. We'll probably stick to the more traditional narrate as we go videos. This was a little on the tricky side for me. But that's going to do it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And I will, of course, be back with more Cataclysm in the near future. And I'll see you in the next one.